We're like a minute early, but everybody got quiet, so I felt like might as well come up here and seize the opportunity of not having to interrupt for a change. So, yeah. So we're up to Daniel chapter 6 as we continue through. We've changed empires now on this one. So we continue to look at really focusing in on how this is a God being at work for his people, accomplishing his plan. And we see this, how critical some of the events are to ultimately what takes place down the road in time as we see more and more of the plan playing itself out. This becomes really clear, I think, in hindsight. At the time, it probably didn't make a lot of sense, all of what was going on. Now, Daniel 6 is an extremely familiar story. You've probably had this since you were in toddler class. It's been very early on. We've looked at this one. So interestingly, Daniel. Did I put Daniel 5 up there? Hopefully, I sent the right one. You know what? Did I have? Make sure. That is not the right one. That was last week's lesson. Hopefully, I sent the right one. If not, we'll be doing it. Make sure I sent the right one. It could be my fault. I sent the wrong one. You know what I did? That's really frustrating. I put the whole thing together. We're not going to have slides today. Put the whole thing together, saved it, didn't save it, is what I did. I worked on this thing, didn't hit save, and instead sent you the last week's. So that's aggravating. That was a lot of work. I put in all those slides. They were amazing. Imagine these slides in which all of the words were up there. Well, you'll need your Bibles with you. So we'll do it literally the old school way. All right, so when we look at this, the story has a lot of interesting things that we can kind of get out of this. And one of the things is that if you look back right off the very beginning in Daniel chapter 6, verse 1, it said, "It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel." One of the things that a lot of people really struggle with when they look at the book of Daniel is trying to really understand and wrap their mind around what it is that, where Darius fits into this story. And I say that people struggle with that because there's also other people who just are salivating at ooh, we found an error, this. We don't know who Darius is. That doesn't mean there wasn't a Darius. There's been a couple things that people have brought up. First of all, we know this is the Medo-Persian Empire. We fully know who Cyrus is. All right, when we get to Cyrus, king of Persia, but there's no historical record of somebody between Belshazzar and Cyrus. That doesn't mean there wasn't somebody who came into charge there from the Mede side of things before the Persian account of who was in charge there. Because during this kind of transitional time, what I think we're seeing here is we're seeing information that is recorded in Daniel that we just have lost the information over time. Because it really doesn't make sense that Cyrus would have been the first one to be right in there, taking over, taking charge, because he wasn't the one that conquered Jerusalem. There were other forces there. So I think we had kind of a temporary King Darius is what we really see here. It was somebody who was, or he was more of a localized governor kind of a king. Similar to how you see King Herod in the New Testament. He was not the Roman emperor, he was a king. So I think we're seeing just a kind of a description of some sort of sub-leader. So King Darius, by the way, is not Darius I or Darius II that we'll hear about later if you look to books like Ezra and Nehemiah. And the whole rebuilding of Jerusalem and the sending back everybody to rebuild the temple. That's a different Darius. So there could be a lot of confusions here because there's technically in history 2 Dariuses and neither one are this one. And so we look at that. We also have Cyrus, who's mentioned here, and we do have record of him. So just completely open there about it. Don't need to hide anything about it. We don't know exactly who Darius the Mede is, and it's okay that we don't, because there's a lot of information that goes on during the book of Daniel that includes specifics and information that aren't found in other history books because nobody wrote it down. And after centuries, it was lost other than here. And so for people to look at Scripture and say, well, we can't find it anywhere else, well, maybe the other books are missing that. Doesn't mean that they instantly want to jump to, well, the Bible must be wrong because of that. Well, maybe the Bible has a little bit more information given to us because there's a reason behind. Darius the Mede had no worldwide political importance. Why write his name down? There's a lot of leaders over the years that we've never written their names down for. So there's, over time, their names just kind of get lost in the shuffle. And I think that's what we see with Darius the Mede here. All right, so he comes in. Why is he even in charge? Why do we have the Medo-Persian Empire now? Well, there was some writing on the wall last week, right? With I could pull up the slides. Apparently, we have last week's slides, no problem. We had that writing on the wall where we had the many tekel person, and that idea that you're numbered, weighed, divided, and Belshazzar's attempt to try to snub God through this banquet he was throwing fell flat on his face over that. And once Daniel had no problem interpreting that for him, Belshazzar died that night. So now Darius is on the scene. So he appoints 120 satraps to rule over the kingdom and 3 administrators over them. That means you've got, of 120 rulers, 3 more very high up rulers, and one of those 3 is Daniel. So Daniel, who had raised himself to that point where Belshazzar had just made him 3rd highest in the kingdom, when Darius the Mede comes in, he's like, all right, who's in charge? Daniel, fine. All right, now you follow me now. He didn't go through and completely uproot the whole thing. God had elevated Daniel to a position of authority during the time when he was under Nebuchadnezzar, and then that seemed to kind of trail back even as chief of the magicians, that he wasn't really being tapped into and used very much. So during the time of Belshazzar at the end there, he's made 3rd highest in the kingdom. He holds that position as one of the top 3, even into the time of Darius the Mede, into the new Medo-Persian Empire. We're also going to see, too, that there is this, from Darius the Mede, he's a different kind of a leader. He's different in his way. He isn't neurotic in the way that Nebuchadnezzar was, where he had this pendulum swing of emotions and extreme emotions on both sides. He's not so haughty as Belshazzar. He's going to be different. You're going to see that throughout this text, that he has a different personality to him. All right, so in the tail end of verse 2. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel was so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So now you see this. All right, so what's this going to cause? What's the very first thing you think of if you've got one of the exiles from Judah being potentially the highest up just underneath Darius? Jealousy. It didn't take long to get to that word. That is exactly what's going to kick in. And that is the entire reasoning behind what happens through the rest of this chapter. So at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. He did everything right when it came to government affairs. When he was asked to do something, he did it correctly. When he was living in such a way that they just couldn't find that smoking gun to get him. They were looking for it, they just could not find it. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. And again, you see this, the side of Daniel that has been that same way that has allowed him to continually gain his stature, status, power, everything that's been given to him by God, but using those kind of personality traits that he has. Josh is going to read for us Daniel chapter 6, verse 5. So if you're ready, Josh, I think we've got hopefully the microphone working for him as well.
Finally, this man said will never find a basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do in the law and his God. Matt, back to you.
All right, thanks, Josh. All right, so the only way they're going to trip him up is if they can find some way to find a law pertaining to what God has asked Daniel to do, because we know he's going to follow that. So if we're going to trap him, we can't get him on the laws of the Medes and Persians. He seems to be pretty much a follower there, and he's doing the right thing. He's He's doing all the good things, which clearly Darius the Mede's not asking him so far to do anything counter to God's teaching, because they know he's not going to break that law at all. So what's the only solution? Get a law passed that Daniel can't follow. That's the only way you're going to trap him, because if it's a law that is not in opposition to God, Daniel's going to follow it. If it's the law of God, Daniel's going to follow it. So how do we get Daniel on some charges? Pass a new law. So the administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." So King Darius put the decree in writing. And enough people saying, like, you need to really have everybody worship you just for a month. I mean, just for a month. Don't let anybody lose any focus other than on you. You're so great, King Darius. And to him, as he's not a godly man, so to speak, he has a tendency to favor the godly one in Daniel, but he himself is not a God follower. And so for him to have a decree issued, then, say, okay, well, if you issue this decree, we got it, because they understand there's something about the law of the Medes and the Persians. Nobody can repeal this law if it's put in there. It's different than where Nebuchadnezzar could change his mind and change his own laws. The Babylonian laws were different. The Medes and the Persians' law did not allow for changes, not at all. Interestingly, that is the exact reason why they're going to get to go back to Jerusalem later. It's the exact same set of laws that are so binding that allow them to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. It's interesting, too, that the entire reason that Israel isn't wiped out is because of the laws of the Medes and Persians that don't allow that. Look at the whole book of Esther, where Mordecai spoils a plan and gets them to rewrite a law that said that everybody could go and attack the Jews and kill them on a particular day, 11 months ahead of time. What a waiting game that was for them to think that was coming. But then the new law says, and then they get to fight you back for 2 days. And so it's great. That idea of what you see there. This set of laws, God uses this unrepealable Medo-Persian law book to his advantage. They tried to get him on this. They thought, well, we'll get Daniel on this. And so, the lions are the whole sticking point here. The lions have to be the executors. Well, God can handle that part. So he's like, all right, that's fine. We'll work with this. So now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. He let absolutely nothing stop him from worshiping God. What a takeaway we can get from that. A law that ultimately was going to lead to his death if he followed God didn't stop him from following God. You see the devotion, really true devotion, when it says, all right, our laws don't allow us to do this anymore. Well, then so be it. I'm going to be a lawbreaker then. That's his mindset. It was what was most important was, and Paul talks about it in the New Testament several times as well. Why fear what they can do to our body here? That's irrelevant in comparison to what could happen to our soul in the future. And so, and for eternity. So that's kind of the idea that Daniel's taking as well, is what's most important is that I follow God and I follow his rules. All right, it's a problem with the not having slides up there, is I have to keep remembering where I left off there. All right, so verse 11. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? They knew he did. They just wanted to kind of act all innocent on this one. But the king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you. Notice they don't list him as Daniel, who is one of the highest ranking people in your entire kingdom. They turn around to the lowest reference they can come up to with Daniel. Daniel, one of those exiles from Judah. And so they kind of, they're already kind of down talking him there on that one. Pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. How do they know he's praying 3 times a day? They are out there stalking him. They are watching him. The fact that they know that little detail, they are out there outside his window. All right, he did it at 9 a.m. He did it at noon. He did it at 3 p.m. 3 times a day he's doing this, breaking the law over and over. They finally got enough paper trail, I guess, on him, so they finally go to the king over it. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. Notice, not because the rule was broken. He doesn't have the same when the lyre and the zither and the harp and everything were played back in chapter 2, and Daniel wouldn't bow down, or Daniel's friends wouldn't bow down to the great statue. I guess it was chapter 3. And on that one, Nebuchadnezzar's mind was just enraged with fury and anger over, how dare you disobey me. Look at the difference with Darius when he says this. So when he hears this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. The problem was, you wrote the law. You kind of threw that in there. He could have honestly, I always thought there's a real quick solution that he could have put in there. He could have put in there, on this particular day, no lions are allowed in the lion's den. Boom, you've solved the problem. He could have done it. I always thought, there was a solution. Come on, think outside the box, Darius. But so regardless, he has to do it. He has to throw him in there. So then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. He does not. And I think the worst part about it for Darius is he doesn't want to be the one that did it. He likes Daniel. He has put Daniel about to put him into the top of the top 3. And so, here he is, this guy that he has utmost respect for. He's a great leader. He's a respectable guy, and he wants him to be there. And he's been caught in this trap laid out, and Darius was the one that kind of inadvertently laid the trap. And so he put him in a no-win situation there. And so on this one, a stone was, verse 17, a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. So again, in a king's world, this nightly, they don't have the TV to turn on to just kind of relax in the evening hours. They would have actual live entertainment brought before him. None of that. All the things that would have been his pleasures that would have been provided for him, none of it. On top of that, he could not sleep. So in verse 19, when it says, at the first light of dawn, I think what you see here is it's all night, and he's just sitting there like, please let him be okay. Please let him be okay. The sun's there. He's like, okay, there's enough light. He runs out there. I think he is chomping at the bit to get out there as soon as there's light to be able to see in that. He got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice. I think he was so afraid of not hearing an answer. This is a different leader in every which way. It's a shame he's not recorded on in history, because he seems like a good guy in a lot of ways. Here he is. He cries out in this anguished voice. He says, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to save you or rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. You can imagine as soon as the word may came out, I imagine Darius was like, oh, hasn't slept all night for one. He's been pacing around thinking he was essentially the murderer, for this, because he fell into this trap that the guys were setting for Daniel. May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouth of the lions. They've not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. That rule you placed wasn't your rule anyway. He's like, I haven't done you any wrong. I haven't done God any wrong, and God saw that. He protected me from the lions. The king was overjoyed. And I think this elation that he felt was, something that was so clear on this of how much it really changed. He was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted out from the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. I don't know. I'm not a cat person. Just be honest. I know some of you are. I don't hate cats. I'm just not. I don't trust them. Man, there's something about them. You look at them. They always feel like they're that animal that's in the house that wishes you weren't in the house. Maybe I had bad cats when I was growing up. They were outdoor cats anyway, but you'd be out there and always give you this look like, I don't really like you. Why are you here? But anyway, the bigger the cat gets, the less I trust them. I'll just say it that way too. And so you start seeing I would not want to ever randomly come across a lion. That's for sure. I would not want to be thrown into a pit of extremely hungry lions who see me as lunch or dinner or whatever time I'm thrown in. That is a horrific thought of how to die. And the thought that Daniel was, because of jealousy of these other people, that they felt so okay with taking someone that they disagreed with, someone that they were jealous of, and wanted whatever to happen to them. The hearts of these people had been so spoiled into rotten, evil desires of, I just want Daniel shredded to pieces because he's taking my job. Or he's getting the position that I should have gotten. He's an exile after all. What does he need us for? Whatever that went through their head, it was nothing but evil, because they knew in their mind, they weren't right, but they knew when they threw him down there, he would be shredded to pieces and eaten alive. And they were excited for it. They wanted it. They sat outside his house. Never once, while they watched him praying over and over again in his upright, upstanding, behaviors and everything, never once did they have a pang of conscience that said, maybe he's not such a bad guy after all. No, they jotted it down, went to the king 3 times a day. He's doing it. We told you that, you wrote this rule down, and now he won't even listen. So the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted out of the den, no wound was found on him because he had trusted in his God. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. And justice was swift in return, and it was not pretty. First of all, it shows you too how much power God had over the animal kingdom there. The fact that he could take these lions, which clearly were out for blood. In this sense, they didn't even they caught him midair as they were being thrown in. But Daniel didn't. Daniel was there all night. And I don't know, I've seen all the cartoon sketches of it where he's practically petting them toward the end of the night. I don't know that it happened quite like that. I don't know if God just held their mouths the whole time while they growled. And so, the angels holding onto their mouths shut, because he says, my God sent his angel and he shut the mouths of the lion. So they were clearly mouths open. Again, distrust for cats, I'm just saying. No. But this idea that he shuts their mouths, and I don't know that there was ever this time, the whole time, that he didn't see God at work until he was lifted out of there. And when that angel lets go of them, and they're immediately turned around and thrown in, because interestingly, they're all there. It doesn't sounds like, at least they, or at least they're not far away, that they were anxiously awaiting to see the fact that he was going to be dead. But instead, there he is alive, and they meet their demise. So, like we see when King Nebuchadnezzar had a big moment, King Darius does as well. He writes this letter. He writes this letter to everybody. So King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language and all the earth, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. All right, what's important about that? His decrees can never be undone. So this is now, through the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, a protection for God's people. Daniel being thrown in there out of jealousy by some people who wanted his position ultimately set up this chain of events, which then Darius writes, Cyrus writes and is found again later. See, one thing about these decrees is if it gets lost, then can't prove it. The record's gone. But the decree that Cyrus will then also write in regards to this, because you see in King Cyrus, another king who's going to very much respect the people of Judah. He's going to give them special treatment. He's going to send them back home. And as he starts to send them back home to Israel, he gives them protections. He gives them passes through the Trans-Euphrates. He gives them all of these things. He gives them money to pay for it. He sends them with the supplies to go build the temple. He gives them, I think this is where it was all rooted from. I think when Darius writes this letter, that sets the stage that Cyrus also had to be nice to him because it's on the books. And then Cyrus is going to write something down that gets lost for a while, but during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, it gets found yet again. And it makes them have to finish paying for everything. They had to stop messing with them during the rebuilding of the temple and the walls of Jerusalem because they fought them. They tried to go after them and kill them the whole time. And so during those times, they finally found the old Cyrus scroll that had the thing on there. Like, well, that law's still on the books. We can't change that one, so everybody's got to be nice to them. And we have to pay for everything out of the royal treasury. And so that's how Jerusalem ended up getting rebuilt. God was at work there. He knew that his people weren't going to be treated nicely from those people around him. That when, like after if we were to leave, if we were all to be carted off to another land, we get carted off to Canada. And all of a sudden, other people come in and settle this land. 70, 80 years from now, when we get sent back here, they're not going to like us coming back. They've completely changed anything. And all of a sudden now there's going to be war that's going to be breaking out amongst these people who, well, this is my land now. No, it isn't. It's my land from before. It's my family's always had this land. Well, it doesn't matter now. I have it. I've got the deed for it. All these things that would be going on, you can imagine. That's basically what they got thrown back into. Had it not been for these protective letters, the job couldn't have been done and completed because there would have been too much fighting at the ground level. God puts an end to that using first Darius with this letter. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Daniel's outlasted a whole lot of leaders. He's getting to be an older guy now. He was taken as a youth by Nebuchadnezzar, so now he's an older man. I don't know if we always picture it that way, but when he's thrown in the lion's den, he's an old man thrown down into a pit. Like that alone, just the throwing down into a pit could be problemsome there because he had to be lifted out. It wasn't like something he could, he was tossed in. And so that's, that in and of itself could have been injury causing just right there. But the fact that he's an older guy, he's made his way out of the training program of Nebuchadnezzar, had several big moments during Nebuchadnezzar's reign of kind of explaining to him his dreams and his visions. And then eventually into Belshazzar's reign, he gets to come on the scene just briefly to basically say, you're done. So Belshazzar's over. And then Darius the Mede comes in, and eventually Cyrus comes in. But it was Daniel through that whole time, with God's help, that is able to keep this very strong tie of God's people right in the ear of the leader of these nations, so that when it's time to send them back, they get exactly the gifts and the laws written needed to accomplish it. God sent them for a reason. If you go back before that, before the Babylonian captivity, they were extremely disobedient. You go all the way back to when they wanted a king. Well, we want a king. King Saul comes on the stage. First of all, it's, we want a king. No, you don't. We want a king. No, you don't. We want a king. Fine, but you don't. And then afterwards, like, man, we don't like these kings. After David, there really wasn't much good after that, too much. Solomon was all right. Things get kind of going awry. You have Hezekiah and Josiah, but aside from those, not a whole lot of good ones out there. And they were leading them into these dark worshiping of idols, Asherah poles, and Baal worship, and all of these things that were happening. Jezebel, who tries to get all of the remaining priests of God murdered off. I mean, all these things that were going, terrible things, over and over. And eventually you get to the point where he's like, all right, you're done. I'm sending you up to really make you think. You're going to have your little 70-year timeout up in Babylon. We're going to get you back on track. But he needed to get them back on track. And that's what really the book of Daniel is showing us, is how he went about doing that. Anybody have any final thoughts or comments? All right, hopefully it was able to be followed even without the slides up there. So, all right, I will do my best next time to actually save the right file when I send it in. So I will also probably try not to work on that at midnight. Made the mistake last night of, taxes are due on Monday, obviously, right? Yeah. Finally had to sit down and do my taxes, and so I was like, I've put this off for the last 4 months, so it took me longer than I thought. So anyway, hopefully I didn't make the same mistake and send the wrong thing in on my taxes. I should probably be thinking about that a little bit more clearly. Yeah. All right, we'll dismiss. For those of you who went to the early service, have a great rest of your day, and for those who've not, find your way into the green pews, and we'll be starting up here in a minute.